Hello friends, and welcome back to Farmyard Care. If you're raising chickens on a small homestead, keeping a few backyard hens for fresh eggs, growing vegetables in your garden, saving kitchen scraps, watching every dollar, and doing your best to make your land more productive, more resilient, and less dependent on the store, then this video was made with you in mind. Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever walked into the feed store, picked up a bag of chicken feed, looked at the price, and immediately started doing the math in your head? You're not the only one. More and more poultry keepers are feeling the pressure because feed costs keep climbing, and in many setups, that single expense can eat up the biggest share of the entire budget. It cuts into your profits, limits your options, and makes it harder to build the kind of simple, self-reliant farm life so many of us are working toward. For a long time, we've been told that healthy birds must rely on corn and soybean meal, and that the only real answer comes in a commercial sack. But is that truly the best way to feed a chicken? Or is it simply the easiest system to sell to us? Because if you've spent any time watching a flock scratch through soil, chase bugs, peck at greens, and turn overlooked scraps into nourishment, then you already know something important. Chickens were designed for a more varied, natural, and resourceful way of eating. So what if the key to lowering your feed bill is not another expensive purchase, but the materials already around you? What if part of that costly corn could be replaced with practical, nutrient-rich ingredients from your yard, your garden, your kitchen, and even your local community? In this video, I'm going to walk you through 8 smart and highly practical ways to turn waste into value, lower feed costs, and support your flock in a way that makes far more sense for the small farmer and backyard grower. By the time we're done, you'll start looking at peels, scraps, weeds, and byproducts in a completely different way. So stay with me because the first shift starts with how we think about feed in the first place. And if you enjoy practical ideas that help you raise healthier birds, grow better food, and build a stronger homestead step by step, make sure you subscribe to Farmyard Care and let's get started. Section 1. The Great Corn Dilemma. Why we need to break free. Before we jump into practical alternatives, we need to slow down for a moment and understand the real issue clearly. Why has corn become such a powerful part of poultry feed in the first place? The answer is straightforward. Corn is an excellent source of energy. It gives chickens the metabolizable energy they need to grow, stay active, maintain body condition, and keep laying consistently. That is exactly why it has sat at the center of commercial rations for so many years. But this is where the pressure begins, and small farmers feel it every single time they buy feed. Corn is no longer just an agricultural input for livestock. It is also one of the world's major food crops for people. And beyond that, enormous volumes are pulled into the biofuel industry to make ethanol. So now this one grain is being pushed and pulled in 3 directions at once: food for people, fuel for industry, and feed for animals. And whenever that balance shifts, whenever demand rises in one area, the price you pay at the feed store rises with it. Now step back from the feed bag and think about the bird itself. A chicken was never meant to live only on a bowl of dry, processed pellets. Chickens are natural foragers. Their instincts were built around movement, curiosity, scratching, pecking, and searching. Their ancestors survived by working the soil for insects, picking at tender greens, finding seeds, and making use of whatever the season and the land placed in front of them. In other words, a chicken's natural diet was never flat and one-dimensional. It was diverse, alive, and closely connected to its environment. And that brings us to the first real lesson in this journey. This is not only about swapping one ingredient for another, it is about changing the way we think. We have to stop treating the feed store as the only place where nutrition begins. We need to start seeing the yard, the garden, the compost pile, the kitchen, and the edges of the homestead as part of the feeding system itself. Once you begin to think in that circular, resourceful way, you are ready to look at your first truly valuable feed ingredient from an entirely different perspective. Section of cassava and root peels. Let's begin with something many people overlook or throw away without a second thought: root crop peels. In many tropical, subtropical, and even some temperate regions, cassava, yams, and sweet potatoes are staple food crops. They are peeled and processed in homes, markets, and small food businesses every day, and that creates a surprising amount of waste. With cassava alone, a notable share of the tuber ends up as peel, and in many places those peels are simply dumped, left to rot, or treated as a nuisance instead of a resource. But when you raise poultry and think like a practical farmer, those same peels start to look very different. What many people call waste can actually become a useful energy ingredient. Cassava root meal and even properly prepared cassava peel meal are rich in carbohydrates and can provide an energy contribution that comes remarkably close to maize. That makes them especially valuable for anyone trying to reduce dependence on expensive corn without sacrificing too much of the energy birds need. Now this part matters, and it matters a lot. Cassava peels should never be fed raw. Fresh cassava contains natural compounds that can release hydrocyanic acid, which is toxic. The good news is that proper processing is simple and affordable. Once the peels are washed, grated, or chopped, and spread out under the sun to dry thoroughly for several days, those harmful compounds are greatly reduced and the moisture drops to a much safer level for storage. What you end up with is a dry, stable cassava peel meal that can replace a meaningful share of maize in both broiler and layer diets when used correctly. And cassava is only the beginning. Yam peels and sweet potato peels can be excellent feed resources as well. Sweet potato peels are rich in digestible energy, and although they contain anti-nutritional factors such as trypsin inhibitors, simple cooking or boiling helps deal with that problem effectively. A balanced mix of sun-dried yam and sweet potato peels can then be milled and stored as a useful, home-prepared energy feed. So the next time you peel roots in the kitchen or see piles of these leftovers nearby, do not look at them as worthless scraps. Look at them the way an experienced homesteader would, as the beginning of a lower-cost, smarter feed system. Because once you learn how to turn everyday peelings into something valuable, you start to realize that reducing feed costs is not always about buying better. Very often it is about seeing better. Section 3. Azolla and duckweed, growing green gold in a puddle. So now we've looked at affordable ways to replace part of the energy side of the ration. But that naturally brings us to the next big question. What about protein? Because anyone who has bought feed for long enough already knows that protein ingredients like soybean meal and fish meal are often the most expensive part of the entire mix. And that is exactly where two remarkable little plants can make a real difference: Azolla and duckweed. If you have never worked with them before, this may be the point where your whole view of low-cost feeding starts to change. Azolla is a tiny floating aquatic fern that many experienced growers call green gold. And once you understand why, the name makes perfect sense. Inside its leaves lives a beneficial cyanobacterium called Anabaena azollae, and together they form a natural partnership that captures nitrogen and helps convert it into plant protein. In practical terms, that means you are growing a feed ingredient that is rich in nutrients, surprisingly productive, and incredibly cheap to produce. Dried azolla can contain roughly 25 to 35% crude protein, along with useful amino acids, calcium, iron, and vitamins such as A and B12. Duckweed works in a similar way and offers many of the same advantages. It absorbs nutrients from the water, helps clean the growing environment, and produces a soft, green biomass rich in protein and natural pigments. For a small farm or backyard setup, that is an impressive return from such a small, simple system. And what makes both of these plants so attractive is how easy they are to grow. You do not need a pond, a fancy setup, or a large piece of land. A shallow lined pit, A cut plastic drum or a low basin in a sunny corner of the yard can do the job just fine. Add clean water, a little fertile soil, and a modest amount of aged manure to encourage growth. Then introduce your starter culture. In about 2 weeks, you can have a thick green mat ready to harvest. And from a very small area, production can be surprisingly generous. The best part is that chickens usually take to it eagerly. You can feed Azolla and duckweed fresh, or you can dry them and mix them into your homemade ration. Used well, they can support gut health, strengthen immunity, improve yolk color, and take real pressure off your feed budget. And that is what makes them so powerful. They are renewable, practical, low cost, and fully in tune with the natural rhythm of a productive homestead. But if these floating plants show us what water can grow, what comes next shows us what waste itself can become. SPLAC 4, Black Soldier Fly Larvae, BSFL, the ultimate waste-to-wealth recyclers. If Azolla and duckweed opened your eyes to how much value can come from a small patch of water, then this next resource may completely change the way you look at farm scraps and food waste. Let me introduce you to one of the most efficient natural recycling systems a poultry keeper can use: Black Soldier Fly Larvae, or BSFL. Now, I know that for some people, the moment they hear the word larvae, the reaction is immediate. But stay with me, because these are not filthy pests like the common housefly. Adult black soldier flies do not even have mouthparts for feeding, and they are not known for spreading disease the way many nuisance flies do. In fact, one of the surprising benefits of having them around is that their presence can help discourage regular houseflies from taking over the same space. What makes BSFL so valuable is the combination of speed, appetite, and nutritional payoff. These larvae can devour an astonishing range of organic waste: kitchen scraps, fruit peels, vegetable trimmings, leftovers, and even livestock manure, and they do it quickly. In a short amount of time, they convert that waste into dense, high-quality protein and fat that your birds can use. That is why they are one of the most exciting tools in waste-to-feed systems. And compared with more familiar live feeds like mealworms, BSFL offers some major advantages. They are especially rich in calcium, which is a tremendous benefit for laying hens that need strong shells and reliable mineral support. They also contain lauric acid, a fatty acid known for its antimicrobial properties, which can help support gut health and overall flock resilience. So you are not just feeding your chickens something they enjoy, you are offering a feed ingredient with real functional value. Then there is the harvest, which is one of the smartest parts of the whole system. You do not have to sift through the bin by hand and chase them around. When the larvae mature into prepupae, they naturally begin to crawl upward in search of a dry place to pupate. If your bin is built with a simple sloped ramp, those mature larvae will climb up on their own and drop neatly into a collection container. No fuss, no complicated handling, and no wasted effort. You simply gather that bucket of moving protein and feed it straight to your flock. It is one of the clearest examples of turning everyday waste into something genuinely valuable, right there on your own homestead at almost no cost at all. Topic Earth 5, Earthworms, the underground protein factory. While black soldier fly larvae are doing their work above ground, there is another feed source quietly producing value beneath our feet. And if you have ever watched chickens on open ground, you already know how excited they get the moment they find it. I'm talking about earthworms. Earthworms are much more than a simple treat. On a dry matter basis, they are packed with high-quality protein and contain important essential amino acids like lysine and methionine. Those nutrients matter because they support some of the most important jobs in the bird's body: feather formation, steady growth, strong body development, and dependable egg production. Earthworms also provide beneficial fatty acids that are difficult to mimic well with many synthetic or highly processed feed ingredients. So the question becomes, How do you produce them consistently without tearing up the whole yard every few days? The answer is vermiculture, and thankfully it does not have to be complicated. A simple bottomless bin set directly on the soil can work beautifully, and so can a stacked plastic container system if that suits your space better. All you really need is a good bedding mix: aged cow or horse manure, shredded cardboard, dry leaves, and your daily kitchen scraps. Then you introduce red wiggler worms and let the system begin to work. As those worms feed, they multiply steadily and transform the bedding into rich worm castings, often called black gold by gardeners for good reason. But long before the material is fully finished, while the bed is still active and full of life, you can take a shovel, scoop up a portion, and offer it directly to the flock. Chickens will eagerly scratch through it, snatching up the worms while spreading the remaining organic matter back onto the ground. It is a feeding system, a composting system, and a soil building system all at once. And that is what makes earthworms so valuable on a productive homestead. You improve your soil, feed your birds, recycle kitchen and farm waste, and keep nutrients moving in a useful cycle instead of letting them leave the property. It is one of the clearest examples of a true closed-loop system, and once you begin thinking that way, it becomes natural to look not only under your feet, but also beyond your own fence line for resources others are throwing away. Section 6. Spent brewer's grain, BSG, and bakery scraps, upcycling community waste. Now let's widen the lens a little and look beyond the boundaries of the homestead itself. If you live anywhere near a town, a small city, or even a growing rural community, there are businesses discarding excellent poultry feed every single day, often without realizing the value it still holds. One of the best examples is spent brewer's grain, usually called BSG. As craft brewing continues to grow, more and more small breweries are producing large amounts of this byproduct. During the brewing process, barley and other grains are soaked in hot water to pull out fermentable sugars. What remains afterward is a heavy, moist pile of grain that still contains significant nutrition. Even though it is called spent, it often still holds around 20 to 30% protein, along with useful fiber, which makes it a very attractive feed ingredient for poultry keepers looking to lower costs. And here's the part many homesteaders love. Breweries often need to pay to get rid of it. So if you show up with clean buckets, a good attitude, and a reliable schedule, there is a very good chance they will be happy to hand it over for free. Chickens usually take to it eagerly. The main challenge is moisture. Because brewer's grain is so wet, it can spoil fast, often within a couple of days. That means you need a plan. You can feed it fresh, dry it in the sun for storage, or preserve it through ensiling by packing it tightly into airtight containers and letting it ferment. Bakery waste is another valuable stream that often gets overlooked. Stale bread, leftover pastries, unsold items, and rejected dough all carry a large amount of carbohydrate energy. When processed sensibly, bakery meal can help replace part of the corn in a ration by supplying metabolizable energy at a lower cost. Of course, this is one of those resources that should be used with some balance and common sense, because certain products may contain more salt, sugar, or fat than you want in large amounts. Still, when you step back and look at the bigger picture, the lesson is powerful. Good nutrition is being discarded every day by local brewers and bakers, and with a little initiative, some of it can be redirected into your feeding system instead of going straight to the landfill. Building those local relationships is more than just a money-saving trick. It is a practical homesteading habit that can reduce waste, cut feed bills, and strengthen the connection between your flock and the wider community around you. Section 7. Okara, the hidden soybean treasure. And while we're talking about useful byproducts from the community, there is one more resource that deserves serious attention. If you happen to live near a tofu maker or a small soy milk producer, then you may be sitting closer to a premium feed ingredient than you realize. I'm talking about Okara. Okara is the soft soybean pulp left behind after soybeans are processed into tofu or soy milk. For every kilogram of soybeans that goes through that process, more than a kilogram of wet okara can be produced. And far too often it ends up being treated like nothing more than industrial waste. But when you look at it through the eyes of an experienced poultry keeper, it is easy to see that this material still holds tremendous value. Nutritionally, okara is far from empty. It retains a significant share of the original soybean's protein, useful fiber, and beneficial compounds such as isoflavones. That makes it a strong plant-based ingredient for poultry diets, especially for anyone trying to reduce dependence on costly commercial soybean meal. In the right feeding system, okara can help replace a substantial portion of that expense while still contributing meaningful nutrition to the flock. Like brewer's grain though, okara comes with one practical consideration: moisture. Because it is so wet, it needs to be used fresh, dried for storage, or fermented to extend its shelf life and make handling easier. And there is another point worth remembering. Okara is also relatively high in fiber, so it works best when it is balanced with good energy ingredients in the ration. Otherwise, birds may fill up before taking in all the calories they need. But once you manage it well, the value becomes obvious. You are taking a discarded byproduct and turning it into a premium source of plant protein for your birds. That is good for your budget, good for your feeding system, and good for the larger cycle of reducing waste. And once you have gathered ingredients like these from the kitchen, the yard, the compost area, and the wider community, there is one final step that can make everything work even better. Section 8, Lacto fermentation, unlocking the magic of your feed. At this point, we've gathered an impressive list of natural, low-cost, and often completely free feed ingredients. But there is one more step that can help you get even more value out of all of them. This is where traditional farm wisdom meets practical biological science, and it comes in the form of lacto fermentation. For the self-reliant poultry keeper, fermentation can be a real secret weapon. It is simple, inexpensive, and incredibly effective. It helps improve digestibility, unlock nutrients that would otherwise stay less available, and supports the kind of gut health that keeps a flock stronger and more efficient over time. In other words, it is not just about what you feed, but also about how well your birds can use it. The method itself is wonderfully straightforward. Take your homemade feed mix, whether it includes grains, seeds, root peels, or a combination of the ingredients we've covered today, and place it in a bucket or container. Then add clean, non-chlorinated water until the feed is covered by a couple of inches. If you want to help the process get started, you can add a small splash of raw apple cider vinegar. Then you let time and biology do the work. Leave the mixture at room temperature for 3 to 4 days, stirring it once each day. Before long, you will notice bubbles rising and a fresh, sour, yeasty aroma developing, something not unlike sourdough or yogurt. That is a sign the fermentation process is active and moving in the right direction. Inside that bucket, beneficial lactic acid bacteria are doing an enormous amount of work for you. They help break down tough plant material, reduce anti-nutrients such as phytic acid, and release minerals and B vitamins that were previously less available. At the same time, the increasingly acidic environment makes life much harder for harmful bacteria, creating a protective barrier that can help reduce the risk of problems from pathogens. And when you feed that fermented ration to your chickens, the difference can be remarkable. Birds are often able to absorb more nutrition from each bite, while the soaked feed creates less dust and less waste. Because the feed swells with moisture, chickens can end up eating less dry matter overall, while still receiving solid nourishment. Over time, many keepers notice firmer droppings, shinier feathers, stronger condition, and better overall resilience. It is one of the simplest ways to stretch feed further without lowering quality, and it brings everything we've discussed into one smarter, more effective system. Conclusion. So how do we bring all of this together in a way that actually works on a real homestead? The answer is to stop looking for one miracle ingredient and start thinking in terms of diversity. Chickens were never designed to thrive on sameness. They do best when their diet is varied, balanced, and connected to the natural habits that shape them over generations. Just picture what that feeding system can look like. A base of fermented grains or homemade mix, some well-prepared cassava peels or other root peels to help cover the energy side, fresh Azolla or duckweed for affordable green protein, black soldier fly larvae for dense nutrition, healthy fats, and valuable calcium. Maybe some spent brewer's grain or Okara from a nearby business. And on top of all that, birds out in the yard scratching for earthworms the way chickens were meant to do. What you create with that approach is far more than a cheap substitute for commercial feed. You create a ration that is alive with variety, richer in natural value, and better connected to the land around you. That kind of system supports stronger birds, healthier bodies, and those beautiful, deep-colored egg yolks that so many small keepers love to see. And yes, lowering feed costs matters. Saving a serious share of your feed bill can change the economics of keeping poultry in a very real way. But the bigger lesson is even more important than the savings. It is about learning to see your land differently. It is about recognizing that your kitchen scraps, garden byproducts, compost, local waste streams, and flock do not exist as separate things. They are part of one cycle, and when you begin to connect them, the whole farm starts working in a smarter way. That is where real self-reliance begins. Not in buying more, but in noticing more. Not in depending completely on an outside system, but in learning how to work with the logic already built into nature. So if today's video helped you look at feed, waste, and your homestead with fresh eyes, be sure to hit that like button. And now I'd love to hear from you. Which of these feed alternatives are you most excited to try first? Will you start drying root peels, grow your own Azolla, build a black soldier fly bin, or experiment with fermentation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I'd really like to know what makes the most sense for your setup. And if you enjoy practical ideas that help you raise healthier birds, grow better food, and build a stronger homestead step by step, subscribe to Farmyard Care and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next video. Until next time, keep working with nature, keep learning from the land, and keep caring for your flock the smart and natural way. See you in the next video.